What's up everybody, Noble Comics here with 10 facts you may not have known about Superman. Now, we'll start with something easy. We all know that Superman gets his power from the yellow sun. We also know that Superman loses his power under the red sun. But did you know that Superman actually gains additional abilities under the blue sun, including the ability to give his powers to other people? This means that under a blue sun, Superman becomes much more powerful with many more abilities, though it is temporary, only as long as he's under there. If he goes back home, eventually the yellow sun will overwrite that, and he'll go back to normal. But it is good to know that Superman can go get a power boost anytime he needs to by flying over to the nearest blue star. The next one here is actually a common misconception about Superman, and that is that Superman is weak to magic. Commonly, you'll find the ways to defeat Superman center around kryptonite, red sun, and magic. Kryptonite obviously weakens and can kill Superman. The red sun drains some of his abilities, and people claim that Superman is weak to magic, but that's actually not true. It's not that he's weak to it, as in it's one of his weaknesses, but he is simply vulnerable to it, meaning he doesn't have any particular defenses against it. So being near a magic user or a spell or something is not going to automatically take him down, but it just means that he's not going to be able to defend against it properly. This is why we've seen magical abilities be able to affect him, again from people like Black Adam or Shazam for example, but it's not like these characters can one-shot him or take him out as if they had kryptonite or something of the like. But that is something that a lot of people get wrong about the character. Something else you may not have known about Superman's abilities is that he actually has a form of telekinesis. Now, not that he's throwing things around with his mind necessarily, but it has been said that Superman has a type of telekinesis by touch, where whenever he is grabbing something, he's extending some part of his aura over it to keep it intact. Like we've seen Superman pick up the front of a giant cargo ship or something, and naturally, the ship would snap in half due to the forces, but when Superman does it, it stays intact. And that's because he is extending this aura, this invisible aura, over the ship to make sure it doesn't be destroyed, which they call telekinesis by touch, or you can call it his exo energy sphere projection, whatever you want to call it. And actually in All-Star Superman, we do get to see a physical version of this after he becomes powered up by the sun. We actually get to see this as he is moving a spaceship away from the sun, not only keeping it intact, but actually protecting it from the sun's deadly rays. Now, we all know that Superman is the last son of Krypton. Or is he? It actually seems like there have been quite a few survivors from Krypton, including Krypto the dog, Supergirl, his cousin obviously, Beppo the monkey, the entire city of Kandor, which has been shrunken down, everybody in the Phantom Zone, and the caveman from Krypton, along with Zod and other villains. So it seems like Krypton is actually doing not that bad when it comes to survivors of a destroyed planet. Quite a few people seem to have made it out alive. So I think we might need to get with the marketing team and change Superman's title. No longer the last son of Krypton, now he's just one of the guys from Krypton. But speaking of survivors of Krypton and speaking of the lost city of Kandor, whenever Superman was in the lost city, shrunken down, he actually lost a number of his powers, and he was there with Jimmy Olsen as well. And the two of them decided to team up and kind of go undercover in that city, and so they both took aliases. And the alias that Superman takes will sound quite familiar. He takes the name Nightwing. And he actually got this name from some Kryptonian birds. That whole issue was actually kind of a spin on Superman and Jimmy Olsen being a Batman and Robin with the names Nightwing and Flamebird. But you may have thought that that came from Nightwing, right? The first Robin after he leaves Batman, but it's actually the other way around. Nightwing got his name from Superman, who acted as the vigilante Nightwing during Kandor as essentially a Kryptonian hero. And you just know that's got to make Batman a little bit salty that his first son, Dick Grayson, didn't choose a superhero name based on Batman or anything, but chose one based on Superman. A little bit of a slap to the face, but it's okay. If Batman ever wants to slap back, he's perfectly capable because he has quite a bit of kryptonite. But did you know that there's actually many different forms of kryptonite that have many different effects? We all know the green kryptonite that weakens Superman, but there's also red kryptonite, which weakens you even further and has other bizarre effects and can cause different mood swings and mutations. A blue kryptonite that can cure the effects of red kryptonite and also affects the bizarro Superman in the same way that green kryptonite does. There's gold kryptonite, which permanently removes all your Superman powers, pink kryptonite that turns you gay, and many, many more. There's actually a large number of these out there. I do encourage looking them all up for all of their very comedic effects. But let's just be glad that Superman never touched that gold kryptonite. Because if he did, he would just be a regular person. An actual mild-mannered Clark Kent. Which does actually exist, but in the Marvel Universe. That's right, Clark Kent actually exists in the Marvel Universe, except he's not Superman, obviously. He's just the mild-mannered reporter. He works with Lois. He works in a building that looks strikingly similar to the Daily Planet on the inside, and he's just a reporter. He first appeared in an X-Men comic all the way back in 1976, and he's had roughly 30 appearances overall throughout the comics. Just little stuff here and there. He'll show up on TV reporting on the death of Mysterio or something, but he's just a normal reporter. But it is still funny to see Clark Kent and Lois Lane in the Marvel Comics, especially if you didn't know it was there, and is a fun little homage to the character and maybe what would have been had Clark Kent not developed any superpowers. And speaking of developing superpowers, did you know that originally Superman could not fly? That's right, and maybe you're thinking, well, that makes sense, right? Because isn't his whole moniker from the early days faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, and can leap tall buildings in a single bound? But he's leaping over them, he's not flying over them, because originally Superman could not fly, he just did these super jumps, essentially. And the reason that changed is not because they thought that flying would be better or that it's a better superpower, but it was actually a necessary change for the 1941 Superman animated series. You see, in the early days of animation here, it was just too difficult to animate Superman jumping everywhere, so they decided to make him fly, so now he would fly everywhere, which was much easier for them to animate. And because of that, we have the most iconic superpower maybe in all of comics, right up there with super strength, super speed. The power of flight is a staple of Superman. That's what you think about him flying through the sky. You know, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman. But that came about from the animated series, not even from the original comic book. And since we're talking about the original comic book character, did you know that Superman was created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster all the way back in the 1930s, and they actually sold Superman to DC Comics for only $130. They completely sold the rights to the characters to DC, and so they've missed out on so many royalties. It's not to say that they were destitute or anything. They worked on the series for DC for quite a while, writing for the character, and they earned quite a bit of money doing that, but not nearly as much as they would they have retained the rights to the character. In fact, for much of Superman's publication history, both on the big screen, in the comics, on TV shows, animation, the two of them aren't even credited. Nowadays, you'll see a credit that says something like, with special thanks to the Siegel family, but the Schuster family still isn't even mentioned. And this is because decades and decades of legal battles have given certain benefits and stipulations and things like that whenever we talk about Superman, and that was one of them for Mr. Siegel. But it's certainly not enough. The families and the estates today are still suing DC for ownership and rights to Superman because they really did miss out on being credited and having ownership of the most popular character ever, potentially. They really did get screwed over throughout this whole ordeal, both from a monetary perspective and just from a fame perspective of being the ones who created the character versus DC buying it from them for pennies on the dollar and then making millions, if not billions, off of the character. And the effects of this are still seen today. You may have noticed that sometimes Superman will disappear from the comics for a long time and will be replaced. That's actually kind of going on pretty recently whenever we had John Kent, Superman's son, take the place of Superman Clark Kent for a while, because whenever those lawsuits go and are being decided, DC will pull back from publishing Superman and will instead publish John Kent. In case they do lose the rights to Superman, they can still go off with their own character. And this goes for Superboy 2, who Siegel created and actually does have some credit for. But all in all, it is a pretty sad story of these two missing out on the greatest, one of the most profitable, one of the best-selling characters ever. And lastly, did you know that Superman was originally a villain? That's right, we all know that Superman came out in 1938. We just talked about Siegel and Schuster pushing that through to DC, but Superman actually made an appearance before that in 1933. He appeared in a short comic known as Reign of the Superman, and the character was much, much different than what we know him today, but he still is familiar. In Reign of the Superman, Superman here is a villain, he's bald, and he's a genius with telepathic powers. He's bent on controlling the world and spreading tyranny. He was corrupted by a potion, turning him from a normal, meek man into this monster, which two aspects of that are pretty familiar. One being a mild-mannered normal person that then becomes a very powerful being like Clark Kent Superman, but also the sort of look and mannerism of the Superman from 1933 bears a resemblance and similarity to Lex Luthor. This bald tyrant bent on controlling the world, powered solely by his mind. And of course, Lex Luthor doesn't have telepathic powers, but he is a super genius, and that does drive his ambitions and his abilities. So it's pretty interesting to see that he was essentially the prototype for the original Superman all the way back then, 5 years before it got published by DC as the character that we know today. And with that, we conclude the list of 10 facts about Superman that you may not have known. If you didn't know any of these, be sure to let me know down in the comments and be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.